Cashin Whitlock III had never meant to stay out past midnight, yet the clamor of New Orleans refused to release him. Earlier that evening he had stood beneath the crystal chandeliers of the Beauregard Ballroom, presenting Argentum Lambda, the predictive engine he swore would spot bank runs before the first rumor left a trader's lips. Polite applause had swollen into raucous celebration once a reporter from the Wall Street Ledger blurted that the model's back tests showed near-prophetic accuracy. Venture capital partners clinked glasses, junior analysts begged for selfies, an aging senator asked, sotto voce, whether the code could be licensed to the Treasury. Cashin's polished grin masked a throbbing pulse behind his temples, the familiar migraine that always followed public triumphs, but every time he tried to slip toward the exit a fresh admirer blocked his path with a new toast. By his fourth pour of Pappy Van Winkle 23, the vanilla oak fumes blurred into a pleasant narcotic haze, and the chandeliers seemed to drift like luminous jellyfish above the parquet floor. When the band struck a final chord of brass-heavy Zydeco, Cashin felt the whole room tilt, only slightly, as if the Hilton itself were a schooner easing off its moorings. He murmured excuses to no one in particular and navigated the corridor toward a private elevator reserved for high-profile guests of the Hotel Saint-Germain, 2 blocks away. Outside, Bourbon Street exhaled steam and saxophone riffs, humid air wrapped him in the smell of powdered sugar and gasoline. His driver, misunderstanding a vague wave of the hand, pulled away before Cashin actually climbed into the sedan, leaving him chuckling on the curb like a man who had just misplaced his own yacht. Deciding the walk might sober him, he let muscle memory guide his Italian loafers across uneven flagstones until the wrought iron balconies of Saint-Germain appeared, festooned with ferns that dripped from a recent rain. A night porter in a starched vest recognized the CEO's face from business magazines and ushered him past the check-in desk with reverent speed. Cashin pressed the brass button for the 6th floor, studying his reflection in the mirrored doors, dark curls slightly disheveled, tie askew, pupils dilated with a cocktail of exhaustion and adrenaline. He rehearsed the room number, 612, 612, while the elevator groaned upward, but when the doors slid open he was met by an unexpectedly dim hallway, its sconce lights flickering as though protesting a power surge. The carpet smelled faintly of magnolia and something older, a trace of antique cologne perhaps trapped in the fiber since Prohibition. Halfway down the corridor he paused, noticing that room 616 stood ajar, a sliver of warm lamplight slicing across the patterned floor runner. The rational part of his brain whispered that someone must have forgotten to latch the door, yet the alcohol-saturated curiosity that had fueled half his patents urged him closer. The electronic lock on his own keycard had been finicky earlier, maybe the staff had relocated him without notice, or perhaps he himself had requested a change and failed to remember. He knocked, softly at first, then louder, but heard only the hum of central air and, he thought, the distant trill of jazz from a radio. Convinced the suite was unoccupied, Cashin eased the door wider and stepped inside. His polished shoe nudged a discarded sketchbook, pages splayed like a paper fan across the threshold, but before he could stoop to retrieve it, the door drifted shut behind him with a conspiratorial click, plunging the foyer into hush. Lamplight revealed an interior nothing like his own sterile executive suite. Canvases leaned against the walls, portraits rendered in swift, confident charcoal strokes, each face so vivid he felt the subjects might breathe. An open bottle of jasmine-scented oil rested beside a vintage Rolleiflex camera on the console table. The incongruity struck him, this was not the temporary clutter of a business traveler, it was the mobile studio of an artist who lived out of hotels the way nomads lived out of saddlebags. Cashin's hand brushed a sheet of vellum and came away dusted with graphite. He should have turned around, should have marched back into the hallway and reported the security lapse, yet something about the quiet intimacy of the room, a half-finished cup of chicory coffee, the muted glow of a laptop left in sleep mode, seduced him into staying. He wandered past the sitting area toward the bedroom, intending to leave a note of apology for the anonymous tenant. The final moments before oblivion played out like a slow-motion vignette. A suitcase lay open at the foot of the king-size bed, its contents meticulously arranged, pastel wigs, a leather-bound passport stamped on every page, a bundle of police procedural textbooks in French. On the pillow nearest the window, strands of lavender hair fanned across white linen, framing the face of a woman who slept as though she had negotiated a truce with the universe. Cashin's brain tried to catalog details, the delicate constellation tattoo shimmering above her collarbone, the rise and fall of her breathing, but equilibrium failed him. The room executed a gentle somersault, gravity surrendered. He registered the surprising softness of the carpet as his knees buckled, then the deeper cushion of the mattress as he collapsed beside the stranger. Her perfume, jasmine, unmistakably, flooded his senses, and the last coherent thought he managed was an absurd hope that the morning headlines would overlook whatever scandal he had just authored. The first sensation that breached Cashin's hangover was neither pain nor light but fragrance, a cool ribbon of jasmine drifting across his face, teasing him awake. He pried open one eye and found the ceiling spinning at a leisurely RPM, like an antique phonograph. He blinked again, steadier now, and became aware of a rhythmic, unfamiliar breathing inches from his ear. A quick inventory told him he was fully dressed save for his jacket and shoes, yet he lay on a bed that was decidedly not his own. He rolled onto his side and froze. The woman beside him slept on her back, one arm flung across the duvet, lavender hair spilling over the pillow like spilled ink in water. In the soft dawn light her skin carried a faint violet undertone, an echo of the city's neon that still clung to the curtains. Just below her collarbone, a constellation tattoo, 5 tiny stars and a sweeping arc, caught the sun's first ember. Cashin's breath snagged. The last clear memory he owned was of pushing open a door that should have been locked, everything after that dissolved into amber-colored blur. A sliver of guilt cracked through the bourbon haze. He swung his legs over the edge of the mattress, intending to ghost out before she woke, but the motion jostled the bed. Her eyes fluttered open, striking, mercury-gray irises sharpening from dream to focus. "Good morning," she murmured, voice husky with sleep yet edged by wry amusement, as if she'd half expected to wake beside a stranger. "Judging by your expression, I'm guessing you're not room service." "I'm emphatically not," Cashin stammered, running a hand through his curls. "I believe I've committed the rare feat of burglarizing a hotel room without stealing a thing." She propped herself on one elbow, studying him without a trace of panic. "No screaming, no throwing pillows. That's promising. Tell me, mystery man, do you at least know your own name?" "Cashin Whitlock." "And yours?" "Zephyrina Crane. Friends call me ZF." He nodded, the name pinning the moment to reality. "I have no idea how I got here, Ms. Crane. The door was open, well, ajar, and I assumed it was mine." "Poor assumption." "Poor for you, perhaps," she said, swinging her legs out of bed. A silk kimono hung on the closet handle, she shrugged into it with dancer-like efficiency. "I usually travel alone. A surprise roommate breaks the monotony." She crossed to a vintage percolator perched on the minibar, filling it with bottled water. While it sputtered to life, Cashin noticed the room in clearer detail, half-finished charcoal portraits taped to the mirror, a topographical map of New Orleans dotted with red pins, a corkboard dense with newspaper clippings about missing persons. On the desk, a tablet displayed an interface labeled Eidolon in sleek serif font. "Are you an artist?" he asked, nodding toward the sketches. "Sketch artist, yes, though the term of art is forensic illustrator. I work with law enforcement, families, whoever needs a face reconstructed from foggy memory." She poured coffee into 2 ceramic mugs and handed him one. "Drink. You look like someone folded you in half and carried you here in a briefcase." Cashin accepted the mug, grateful for its steadying heat. "If I told you I'm usually more composed, would you believe me?" "Not even a little." Her smile flashed, then vanished behind a sip of coffee. "But I'm willing to test the hypothesis." He cleared his throat. "First test, honesty. I spent last night pitching a predictive finance algorithm to donors. Too many toasts later, I stumbled in here. No ulterior motive, no memory of the final 5 minutes. Honesty, then." She extended her hand, palm up like a dealer offering cards. "Let's formalize it. 7 hours, absolute truth. Questions, answers, no lies until 2 p.m. Think of it as penance for unlawful entry. The proposal startled a laugh from him. 7 hours is ambitious. Try living among detectives. Truth has a half-life shorter than caffeine. She waggled her fingers. Shake on it. He clasped her hand. Her grip was firm, calloused at the fingertips from charcoal and stylus. A faint electrical jolt, either chemistry or caffeine, jumped between them. Excellent, she said. First question, why does a man who designs crystal ball software for banks wander around without security? Cashin rubbed his temple. Because sometimes security feels like a cage. Tonight I wanted anonymity. Second question, anonymity seeker, when was the last time you slept 8 hours? He opened his mouth, closed it, then shrugged. A year ago, on a trans-Pacific flight. I dreamt in candlestick charts even then. Zef pulled a stool from beneath the desk and sat, folding one leg beneath her. Insomnia that persistent sounds pathological. I prescribe reckless honesty and strong chicory. And what about you? Cashin countered, warming to the game. Why a suitcase full of wigs? Going undercover. She plucked a lavender strand from her own hair. Every witness remembers a different color. Sometimes I like to match expectations. Her tone lightened, but a shadow crossed her eyes. Mostly, the wigs help frighten people, trust me. They think, if she's odd on purpose, she won't judge my odd memories. Cashin studied the corkboard, the array of vanished faces. All these people, are they cases you've solved? Cases still open. She tapped a photo of a teenage boy, grainy and sun-bleached. Miguel Ortega. Disappeared near Lake Charles, 2011. His sister still sends me birthday messages addressed to him. Her finger drifted to a charcoal portrait of an elderly woman. Dorothy Kleben. Last seen boarding a bus to Baton Rouge. I sketched her from the driver's description. No hits yet. The weight in her voice made Cashin's chest tighten. He set his mug down. You shoulder a lot of ghosts. Someone has to. She turned back to him, assessing. You seem the type who calculates risk before moving a muscle. Why are you still here, risking a headline that says, FinTech Wunderkind found in stranger's bed? Because, he said, surprising himself with the answer, for the first time in months I don't feel like a dashboard KPI. I feel, human. He gestured to the room. This place breathes. Zef's expression softened. Careful, Cashin. Humanity is addictive. He laughed, and the sound eased the last of the tension coiled in his spine. On impulse he reached for the sketchbook he'd nearly tripped over the night before. The cover read Atlas of Lost Faces in embossed copperplate. Inside, hundreds of quicksilver portraits unfurled, children, drifters, refugees, each rendered with aching precision. Cashin's breath hitched when he noticed a watermark on one page, his own company's logo, Whitlock Q, stamped faintly in the corner of a database printout. He lifted the page, brow furrowing. Why is my corporate seal on a missing persons report? Zef set her mug aside, expression unreadable. That, she said quietly, will be my first question when the clock strikes 2. By the time the bedside clock blinked 8:17 a.m., the jasmine-scented hush of room 616 had given way to industrious clatter. Zephyrina had pushed the drapes wide, letting Gulf sunlight pour across the carpet while she hunted through an avalanche of sketchbooks for a particular folio. Cashin, jacket back on but collar still unbuttoned, perched at the edge of the writing desk with her tablet in his lap. Their pact of absolute truth ticked forward, each question answered promptly, no evasions, no hedging, yet every new fact only seemed to deepen the mystery that hung between them. He scrolled the Eidolon dashboard again, marveling at its brutal elegance, a grid of grayscale portraits, each tile ringed by a pulsing halo that changed hue whenever a data point updated, last known GPS ping, social media activity, police file amendment. Hovering over a face revealed a compact dossier: height, scars, dental records, time since disappearance measured down to minutes. What astonished Cashin was the platform's infrastructure. It ran on the same proprietary cloud clusters he leased to hedge funds at ruinous rates. "You built all this yourself?" he asked. "Front end, yes," Zephyrina replied without looking up. "Back end, no. I rent server time from a boutique provider, pays to keep evidence off public clouds." Cashin's thumb froze above the screen. "Which provider?" "Whitlock Q Secure Compute. Cheapest encrypted storage I could find that isn't secretly an alphabet agency." His stomach lurched. "That's my company. I didn't know we hosted a project like this." Zephyrina straightened, eyes narrowing. "Funny thing about large corporations, the left hand rarely audits the right." She flipped open the folio and extracted a single sheet, an invoice stamped paid, the Whitlock Q watermark glimmering like a watermark of guilt. 72 terabytes, prepaid through December. "Someone inside your fortress likes my work." Cashin exhaled through his teeth. "Or likes the data you're collecting. Which is why I air-gapped the raw files from the live site," she said. "Only aggregate metadata ever touches your racks. Still, if there's a mole, I'd appreciate a name before my archive vanishes into a black budget." "Honesty requires I admit I don't know," he said, and meant it. "But I can find out." Zephyrina's shoulders eased a fraction. She gestured toward the door. "Coffee downstairs?" "I interrogate better on a full stomach." They rode the elevator to the ground floor in companionable silence, Cashin clutching the tablet, Zephyrina carrying a messenger bag bulging with charcoal sticks and archival pens. The lobby smelled of chicory and furniture wax, a jazz trio rehearsed near the bar, horns muted at this hour. They claimed a corner table in the glass-roofed atrium where morning sun ricocheted off fountains shaped like wrought iron crescents. A waiter appeared. Zephyrina ordered café au lait and beignet. Cashin asked for black coffee, then changed his mind, make it a double espresso and a side of beignet. When the waiter left, she arched an eyebrow. "Trying local carbs now, are we? Honesty, remember? I'm starving." She tapped the tabletop twice, as if gaveling the next round of questions. "Your turn, Whitlock. What drives a man to gamble his career on predictive finance?" Cashin sipped water to buy seconds. "My mother was a community banker. 2008 wiped out her entire client base, families, small businesses, people who trusted her. She never recovered from the guilt. Argentum Lambda is my over-engineered apology." Zephyrina listened without blinking, as though sketching his confession in charcoal strokes. "And does apology scale?" "It had better," he said softly. "Because the next crash won't wait for our contrition." The waiter returned, unloading a small mountain of powdered sugar. Cashin discovered, to his embarrassment, that beignet required both hands. Powdered sugar bloomed across his cuffs like fresh snowfall. Zephyrina laughed, an unguarded, bell-clear laugh that made him grin in spite of himself. "My turn," he said, dabbing sugar off his sleeve. "Why lavender hair?" "Synesthesia," she answered, dusting sugar from her fingertips. "Faces trigger colors in my mind. When I'm working a case, I dye my hair to match the dominant hue of the missing person I'm focused on. Helps me stay inside their outline." "That's unexpectedly beautiful." "Unexpectedly burdensome, some days," she corrected, but her smile lingered. They moved to brass tacks. Cashin opened the tablet again, navigating deeper than a casual user ever could. He located a hidden diagnostics pane, server callouts, latency logs, billing tokens. A string of system notes flashed crimson, automated export enabled, dest, lacuna_corp/tr0. The timestamp was yesterday, 23:04 p.m., the exact hour he'd been clinking glasses in the Beauregard ballroom. Zephyrina leaned closer, her hair brushing his shoulder. "Lacuna Corp," she repeated, tasting the name. I've seen it on shell companies buying abandoned motels near border towns. Never could pierce the veil. Cashin's pulse hammered. Someone in my C-suite granted them root access. They're siphoning your dossiers in real time. Which means my witnesses are compromised. Her jaw tightened. And your algorithm might be, too. He closed the tablet, decision crystallizing like sugar on his sleeve. I need the board to hear this. But I'll look paranoid without proof. Then let's collect some. Zephyrina wiped sugar off her lip with the back of her hand. I've got paper trails, geotags, maybe even facial matches if Lacuna recycled staff IDs. You'd share that? She met his gaze, direct, steady. You walked into my life by mistake, Cashin. Turns out you're exactly the mistake I needed. A hush fell between them, the kind that crowds instinctively respect. Around them the atrium buzzed, cutlery clinked, a child laughed at the fountain, but their table felt sealed in glass. Cashin found himself brushing a stray lavender strand from her cheek. She let him, eyes half-lidded, as though memorizing the weight of the gesture. Then she glanced at her watch. 10:30. Honesty clock still running. He cleared his throat, withdrawing his hand. Right. One more confession. Fire away. I don't want this pact to end at 2. Her smile was slow, but it reached her mercury-gray eyes. Then we renegotiate at 1:59. They spent the next hour hunched over twin screens, her tablet, his phone, cross-referencing Whitlock Q billing IDs with shell corporations, plotting export routes on a digital map. Cashin sent encrypted queries to his lead sysadmin, framing them as routine audits. Zephyrina overlaid missing person sightings atop Lacuna's real estate purchases, the patterns aligned like constellations she alone could see. At noon they ordered more coffee, declining lunch menus. Zephyrina pulled a fresh sketch pad from her bag and began drawing as she talked, first a cluster of dots representing server nodes, then a face emerging from negative space. Cashin recognized his own features, rendered in bold charcoal, eyes weary, mouth determined. She labeled it witness number 322 and slid it across the table. In case you vanish before we're done, she said. He studied the portrait, throat tight. I don't plan on vanishing. Good, she replied. Neither do I. At 1:45 they packed up. Cashin settled the bill, Zephyrina pocketed the receipt, scribbling something on the back before tucking it into her sketchbook. They rose simultaneously, two conspirators bound by caffeine, data leaks, and a ticking clock of truth. As they stepped into the elevator, Cashin felt the hotel tremble, not physically, but in the sense that the world's axis had tilted another degree. Whatever waited above, his abandoned suite, her evidence cache, the future, would not resemble the night before. And somewhere, deep in Whitlock US servers, a silent export stream continued to pulse, counting down the minutes until their honesty expired or transformed into something far more dangerous. Cashin's phone began to vibrate the moment the elevator doors glided shut, a muted staccato against his palm that felt louder than the cables humming overhead. The caller ID was a string of numbers he recognized as the Whitlock Q diagnostic line, an automated escalation reserved for emergencies. He glanced at Zephyrina, who gave a crisp nod. She was already lifting her tablet to record. He swiped to accept, putting the call on speaker. A synthesized voice crackled through. Server cluster Delta 9 is registering unscheduled root-level mirroring to external endpoint. Source authorization, board-level token. Please confirm legitimacy. Cashin's stomach dropped. A board-level token meant only 5 people besides him, the chairman, 2 senior partners, and a pair of venture reps who rarely touched the infrastructure. He leaned toward the phone. Authorization denied, he said. Suspend mirroring, initiate trace, log every packet. Encrypt the log with my personal G key. Acknowledged, the system replied before the line clicked dead. Zephyrina tucked a stray lavender strand behind her ear. You just put a neon target on your back, Whitlock. He rubbed his jaw, feeling the bristle of a forgotten morning shave. Then we'd better finish what we started before someone deactivates my badge. The elevator slowed, dinged for the 6th floor, and opened onto a corridor that looked subtly wrong. The sconce nearest them was dark, the carpet pattern misaligned by half an inch where 2 rolls met. Yet the placard on the wall still read 6 in the hotel's ornate script. "This isn't the hallway I woke up in," Zephyrina murmured, stepping out cautiously. 616 should be left of the lift, but the numbers are going the other direction. Cashin peered at the nearest door, 608. His own suite, 612, ought to be a few doors down, but he could already see the numbering skip directly to 606, then 604. Maybe we got turned around? No, Zephyrina said, voice sharpening. The architect inside me says we're on a spur. Look, no fire escape map on the wall. And see the baseboard? It's unfinished. She produced a slim flashlight from her bag and followed the baseboard to an innocuous service door stenciled with maintenance only. A generic push bar invited pressure. She pressed, it gave way soundlessly. Cool, dusty air rolled out, smelling of paint thinner and decades of disuse. Beyond lay a narrow staircase that rose half a flight before flattening into a landing no wider than a coffin lid. Cashin aimed his phone light upward, faded numbers were spray-painted on the concrete riser, 7.5. An interstitial floor, Zephyrina whispered. Hotels sometimes hide utilities between guest levels, but guests shouldn't have access. She started up, every footfall muffled by thick dust. Cashin followed, heartbeat sinking with the hush. At the landing a rust-flecked door bore no number, just a tarnished brass peephole crusted with verdigris. Zephyrina tried the knob, locked. Cashin retrieved a titanium business card from his wallet, the kind with a micro-USB that doubled as a passkey for conference rooms. He slid it between jam and strike plate, twisting. The latch clicked back like a tongue relinquishing a secret. They entered a space suspended between eras. The ceiling was low, cross-braced with wooden beams blackened by age. A lone skylight, more hatch than window, breathed dusty daylight onto a brass horn gramophone perched on a trunk. Shelves lined the walls, crowded with hatboxes, yellowing ledgers, and an Art Deco mirror shrouded by a sheet. Against the far wall sat an antique roll-top desk, its tambour door was half open, revealing stacks of letters tied with silk ribbons. Zephyrina circled the gramophone, fingers hovering over its winding key. Victor talking machine, model VV9, she murmured. About 1920. Someone cared enough to oil it recently. Cashin lifted the sheet from the mirror. Instead of his reflection he saw a window into an adjacent room, one-way glass, its back painted black except where the sheet had protected it. The opposite side looked like a modest suite, floral wallpaper, velvet settee, light still burning. A voyeur's balcony, he muttered. Or a witness box, Zephyrina suggested. She had knelt by the letters, untying the first bundle. The paper was ivory, ink browned by oxidation yet perfectly legible. B.H. to R.D., July 2nd, 1925, she read aloud. My dearest Remy, the riverboat leaves at midnight, but father's men watch every dock. Meet me in the hidden room, and we'll rewrite the map of the world with our footsteps. Cashin crouched beside her, adrenaline cooling into fascination. Star-crossed lovers hiding between floors. Sounds romantic until you realize someone built this space to keep them secret. Zephyrina flipped to the final letter in the stack. The handwriting wavered, blotched by what looked like tears. If destiny parts us, let whoever finds these words finish our duet. No signature, just a smudged lipstick kiss. She looked up, eyes glimmering. Cashin, do you realize what this is? A time capsule of forbidden love. And the hotel never demolished it. Maybe they didn't know it existed. They know. She pointed to a modern LED motion sensor mounted near the ceiling, its green eye blinking. Someone's been inside this decade. Cashin's phone chimed again, this time a secure text from his sysadmin. Trace reveals continuous outbound to Lacuna since February. Source credential equals Tiberius Holt. Audit trails erased 5 minutes ago. He swore under his breath. Holt's the board chairman. He just burned the logs. Zephyrina's jaw set. Then he's laundering my witness data for Lacuna. Which means the people on my board are in danger. She scanned the shelves, eyes narrowing at a stack of ledgers. Help me move these. Together they heaved aside dusty tomes, uncovering a steel strongbox bolted to the floor. Its combination dial was worn smooth, but an embossed crest matched the monogram on the letters. BH Zephyrina knelt, studying it. I can crack mechanical locks, but this might take time. Cashin crouched, running fingertips over the dial. BH, Beatrice Havisham, maybe? The heiress from the letters. He pressed his ear to the cool metal, turning the dial with slow precision. Years of safe-cracking simulations, used to test branch security, guided his movements. A faint click, another, then a heavier thunk reverberated through the box. Zephyrina exhaled. Show off. Inside, velvet lining cradled a lacquered jewelry box and a folded document sealed with wax. Cashin lifted the document, the seal bore 2 intertwined initials, B and R, a trumpet curling through the loop of the R. He broke it carefully. The parchment unfurled into a deed of trust dated September 3, 1925. It conveyed $10 million, adjusted for inflation, in perpetuity to the first pair who discover our refuge and choose love over fortune. The funds were sequestered in a bank still operating under a different name, Gulf Coast Mutual, now a Whitlock Q Partner institution. Cashin's breath hitched. This money exists. It's grown for a century. Zephyrina lifted the jewelry box. Inside lay a slim, gold key with an engraving, 713. A room number, she said. But there is number 713 on the directory. Cashin recalled the voyeur mirror. Maybe there is, and it's watching us right now. Zephyrina strode to the mirror, searching the frame. A hairline seam suggested a hidden latch. She slid the gold key into an almost invisible slot, the pane released with a soft sigh and pivoted inward like a door. Beyond stretched a narrow passage illuminated by a single Edison bulb. At the far end, a numbered door waited, 713. She turned to Cashin. We go together. Honesty pact still applies. He offered his hand, she took it. The bulb's filament flickered as if in warning, but they stepped into the passage, pulling the mirror door shut behind them. The air smelled of cedar and distant perfume, like a memory trapped in amber. Each footstep sounded louder than the last, echoing off walls that had kept secrets for 100 years. When they reached the door, Cashin tried the knob. It yielded without resistance, revealing a room preserved in twilight, velvet drapes drawn, crystal decanters half full of amber liquid, a gramophone identical to the one behind them. A ledger lay open on the vanity, the last entry dated only 2 weeks prior. Deposit confirmed. Operation Lacuna on schedule. Zephyrina's pulse thudded in her ears. They're using this love nest as a dead drop, she whispered. Cashin's phone vibrated yet again, but he ignored it. Instead he lifted the ledger, scanning rows of transactions, cryptic codes that matched shell accounts he'd flagged earlier. Proof enough to bury Holt and, perhaps, Lacuna Corp. Zephyrina crossed to the window, tugged the heavy drape aside. The glass was frosted from age, but she could still make out the Mississippi glinting beyond rooftops. Cashin, the ghosts asked us to finish their duet. I think they meant more than romance. They meant justice. He closed the ledger, tucking it under his arm. Then let's give them an encore that rattles every chandelier in this hotel. Their hands found each other again, instinctive now. Behind them, the door to 713 whispered shut, sealing off a century of clandestine whispers. Ahead lay a staircase descending into the service bowels of the Saint Germain, and beyond that, a boardroom where truth would land like a thunderclap. The honesty clock had 7 minutes left, but Cashin sensed the pact had already evolved into something more permanent, an alliance forged in dust, jasmine, and the hummingbird flutter of shared purpose. Cashin's executive helicopter lifted from the hotel's rooftop helipad just after 6, its rotors slicing the humid air with the indifference of a guillotine. Yet instead of climbing toward the private airport, the pilot banked low across the French Quarter, circling twice until the city lights resolved into a floating mosaic beneath the skids. The maneuver was Cashin's coded signal to the Whitlock Q crisis channel: contingency in progress, delay extraction. Zephyrina sat opposite him, seatbelt cinched tight over her messenger bag. The ledger from room 713 lay between them, and every time the cabin trembled she clamped a hand over it as though it might try to escape. When the helicopter settled on the roof of Perdita Tower, a 30-story glass blade owned by Whitlock Q, Cashin led her across a windswept expanse of safety grating to a weather station shack. He swiped his biometric pass, the steel door unlocked with a hiss. Inside, a private elevator waited, its walls lined with Kevlar-reinforced panels. The carriage descended only one floor before opening into a penthouse garden the board affectionately called the conservatory, a greenhouse of orchids and citrus trees engineered to muffle conversation from prying ears. Nighttime spotlights turned dew into diamonds, automated misters sighed like distant surf. Cashin guided Zephyrina down a flagstone path to a wrought iron gazebo in the center. A single board member already sat inside, Delilah Arkwright, venture representative for Black Meridian Capital, dressed in a charcoal pantsuit that matched the color of her skepticism. She rose, smoothing lapels, but her eyes flicked past Cashin to Zephyrina's bag. "You're late for an unscheduled emergency, Whitlock." "I was busy finding the company's missing conscience," he replied. He set the ledger on the stone table between them, flipping to a page stamped with today's date and Lacuna's routing codes. "This is what Chairman Holt buried while you were reviewing stock buyback proposals." Delilah adjusted her glasses, scanning the columns. $10 million transfers, encrypted notes, initials that mapped to Shell directors. Her voice remained steady, but her pulse leaped visibly at her throat. "You're alleging Holt is diverting proprietary data to a criminal outfit." "I'm showing it," Cashin said. "And we have server traces that put his credentials on every export." Zephyrina stepped forward, producing high-resolution stills from her tablet. Holt in a subterranean server room 2 weeks earlier, Holt's assistant wheeling crates labeled Lacuna medical devices through a Whitlock Q loading dock. Each photo bore a metadata stamp verified by a third-party chain of custody app. Delilah's composure cracked, she closed her eyes, exhaling through her nose. "If any of this leaks before we convene the board, Whitlock Q's valuation drops 20% overnight." "I'm less concerned about market optics," Cashin said, "and more about the hundreds of missing people whose identities Holt has commodified." Delilah's gaze slid to Zephyrina. "And you are?" "The person who drew their faces," Zephyrina answered. "The person Holt's buyers will try to erase once they realize we've severed their feed." Delilah paced the gazebo, stilettos clicking on slate. "We'll need a forensic audit, outside counsel, probable cause for federal agencies." "Stop lawyering time," Cashin cut in. "Holt's expecting me at an 8 p.m. dinner to toast our successful export partnership. If I don't show, he'll know I'm on to him." Zephyrina unzipped her bag, revealing a portable hard drive and a slim manila envelope. "Plan is simple. Cashin attends dinner wearing a button camera. I'll be across the street with a parabolic mic, streaming everything to a secure vault. Once Holt incriminates himself, Delilah triggers an emergency board vote to remove him and freezes his access tokens." Delilah lifted a brow. "You're assuming I'll side with you." "Black Meridian owns 14% of Whitlock Q," Cashin said. "If the DOJ indicts us for trafficking biometric data, your fund writes the biggest check. Self-interest is a reliable ally." A long silence fell, broken only by the hiss of misters and the whir of rooftop turbines. Finally Delilah extended her hand to Zephyrina. "Send me your full dossier. If it holds up, I'll call an emergency session." Zephyrina clasped it. You'll have the files before the elevator hits the lobby. Cashin allowed himself one breath of relief before his phone buzzed again, this time a text from an unknown number, beautiful view from the Hudson building. Smile for the camera, Cass. Attached was a grainy telephoto shot, him and Zephyrina leaning over the ledger moments earlier. The vantage point matched the neighboring Hudson building's rooftop. He showed the screen to Zephyrina, her expression shuddered. Lacuna's counter-surveillance. They anticipated we'd seek high ground. Delilah frowned. How compromised are we? Enough that Holt knows we're gathering evidence, Cashin said. He'll accelerate whatever exit strategy he's arranged. Zephyrina's fingers danced across her tablet, overlaying satellite imagery of downtown. Hudson's roof has 2 service elevators. If Lacuna has a team there, they'll ghost before local PD can respond. We need to jam their uplink or they'll dump everything they just shot onto a darknet Dropbox. Cashin's mind shifted into systems architect mode. Perdita's microwave relay dishes can flood a 10-block radius with white noise if we repo-int them. Takes 30 seconds and an admin password. Do it, Delilah said. I'll handle internal fallout. Cashin opened a secure maintenance app, authenticated, and issued the command. Across the skyline, 2 dishes atop Perdita rotated with insect precision. In the gazebo, their phones lost signal, Zephyrina's tablet flickered to offline mode. She nodded approval. They're blind. Wind gusted through the open greenhouse panels, scattering orchid petals like confetti. Cashin glanced at his watch, 7:04 p.m., I have 56 minutes to meet Holt. I'll need new clothes, these are sugar-stained, and a way to deliver the camera feed despite the jamming. I'll rig a line-of-sight laser transmitter, Zephyrina said. Tiny, impossible to intercept. I can hide it in your lapel pin. Delilah's eyebrows climbed. Do all forensic illustrators moonlight as Q Branch? I improvise, Zephyrina answered. Occupational hazard. They parted at the conservatory doors. Delilah headed for the boardroom to summon legal counsel. Cashin and Zephyrina returned to the weather shack, where a garment bag awaited, Delilah's efficiency already at work. Inside hung a midnight blue dinner jacket, crisp shirt, and bow tie. Cashin changed in a cramped space while Zephyrina soldered a pen-sized diode to the back of a silver lapel pin embossed with the Whitlock Q logo. When he emerged, she clipped a matching receiver behind her ear, disguised as an Art Deco earring. Audio two-way, she explained. Tap the pin twice to talk, once to mute. The camera is your tie clip, tilt your head 10 degrees for a better frame. He practiced, angling until she gave a thumbs up. For a moment they stood inches apart, rotor wash from the idling helicopter whipping her lavender hair against his collar. Cashin tucked a strand behind her ear, his hand lingering. When this is over, he said, dinner without espionage? She smiled, tired but luminous. Only if you promise to leave the camera at home. They boarded the helicopter again, but this time Zephyrina stayed behind, sprinting across the roof to the edge where she could sight the Hudson building with a collapsible scope. Cashin watched her shrink to a violet speck as the aircraft lifted, a knot tightening in his chest that felt suspiciously like fear for someone else's safety. 10 minutes later the helicopter touched down on the riverfront helipad adjoining the Grand Iberville Hotel, where Holt's celebratory dinner awaited in a private dining room. Cashin descended marble steps into a lobby that smelled of cognac and old money, the tie-clip camera already streaming a silent tableau to Zephyrina's encrypted vault. Holt greeted him with a clap on the shoulder, his politician's smile perfectly pitched. Cashin, my boy, you look like you wrestled a thunderstorm. Sit, chef's prepared something special. Cashin slid into the high-backed chair, fingers brushing the lapel pin twice to confirm Zephyrina's channel was live. Holt poured brandy, the amber liquid catching candlelight like molten gold. To partnerships, Holt toasted. Cashin raised his glass but did not drink. Across the city, on Perdita's roof, Zephyrina lay prone behind a planter, headphones pressed tight. Holt's voice crackled in her ear, buttery and unhurried. She balanced a directional mic on the parapet, eyes tracking the Hudson building where silhouettes scurried, confused by the blackout. Her thumb hovered over a switch that would beam the live feed to Delilah and the boardroom. Holt leaned in, brandy swirling. "You've done exemplary work. Our friends at Lacuna are impressed. They believe our Argentum Lambda can do more than predict bank runs, it can predict societal panic. Imagine selling that foresight to the highest bidder." Cashin felt heat crawl up his neck. "I didn't design it for extortion." "No," Holt agreed, "but tools evolve beyond their makers. You of all people should appreciate market forces." He produced a fountain pen and slid a contract across the table. "Sign, and you retain CEO status plus a 5% equity bonus. Decline, and the board accepts my resignation recommendation, yours." Cashin's hand hovered over the pen, then withdrew. "I think you underestimate my attachment to conscience." Holt's smile thinned. "Conscience is a luxury, Cashin. One you'll soon be unable to afford." He snapped his fingers. Two men in tailored suits emerged from a side door, stationing themselves at either end of the dining alcove. On the rooftop, Zephyrina's pulse spiked. "Cashin, you've got company," she whispered, voice barely audible over rotor echo. "Security detail, both exits." "Stall." Cashin tapped his pin once to acknowledge, then forced a steady breath. "Before I decide, indulge my curiosity. Where does Lacuna house the people they disappear?" Holt's eyebrows twitched, surprise slipping through the facade. "What an odd question. Humor me." "In warehouses, mostly," Holt said, too quickly. "Some in medical clinics off the books." "Why?" Cashin leaned back, crossing his arms. "Because I just bought every warehouse within a 100-mile radius of Lacuna's known drop points. And I invited Homeland Security to tour them tomorrow." Holt's glass froze midway to his lips. "You're bluffing." A door burst open behind Cashin. Delilah Arkwright strode in, flanked by two federal marshals and a corporate security officer. She held up a leather folder. "Chairman Holt, you are hereby suspended pending investigation. Your access tokens have been revoked, and these officers have a warrant to seize your devices." The color drained from Holt's face. He shot to his feet, but the marshals were faster, gripping his arms. The contract fluttered to the carpet. Cashin watched Holt's expression shift from shock to calculation to something like betrayal. "You," Holt hissed at Cashin, "you did this." Cashin met his gaze, voice low. "No. You did, the moment you priced human lives like derivatives." On the roof, Zephyrina exhaled a trembling breath. She lowered the mic, muscles unclenching only when she saw the silhouettes in the Hudson building retreat toward the service stairwell, blinded, perhaps, by their own contingency failing. She packed her gear and hurried to the weather shack elevator. By the time she reached the conservatory, Cashin was already there, jacket draped over one arm, tie loosened. The boardroom doors were closed behind him. Holt was gone, escorted to custody. Delilah stood nearby, phone glued to her ear, negotiating with Crisis PR. Cashin crossed the marble floor to Zephyrina in 3 strides and, without a word, pulled her into an embrace that smelled of brandy and ozone. For a moment she let herself sag against him, the adrenaline leaving her limbs hollow. "Is it over?" she asked into his shoulder. "Beginning," he corrected. Holt was the first chord. "We still have to dismantle Lacuna." She leaned back, studying his face. "Then we keep playing." Outside the conservatory's glass wall, the last blush of sunset faded into indigo, city lights flaring awake. Somewhere a siren wailed, dopplering into the night like the opening note of a new symphony. Cashin felt Zephyrina's hand slide into his, their fingers interlacing with the easy certainty of a conclusion reached, and a sequel already composing itself in the hush between heartbeats. The morning after Holt's arrest, Perdita Tower felt less like a corporate headquarters and more like an ad hoc command post. Overnight, Cashin had converted the 28th floor innovation lab into a war room, touch screens along every wall, desks dragged into a horseshoe around a single long table where laptops, evidence binders, and half-drained coffee cups jostled for space. Zephyrina arrived just after dawn, hair pinned up and charcoal smudges already ghosting her fingertips. She had been sketching since 4, translating grainy CCTV stills of Lacuna couriers into crisp, courtroom-ready likenesses. Cashin greeted her with a mug of chicory and a weary smile, then briefed the growing team of data engineers, pro bono attorneys, and crisis management consultants who had volunteered in the night. Their mandate was stark: freeze every Lacuna pipeline they could identify, liberate any live assets the traffickers still held, and broadcast enough proof to make federal prosecution inevitable. By 10 a.m. the room buzzed with a peculiar mix of dread and exhilaration. A forensic accountant traced shell payments from Holt's discretionary fund to a rural clinic outside Shreveport. A cybersecurity pair decrypted a Lacuna employee roster hidden inside a steganographic JPEG. Zephyrina sat cross-legged on a stool, streaming the live feed from her tablet to a wall display while she shaded cheekbones on her latest portrait. Cashin moved between clusters, answering questions, authorizing server patches, and, every so often, pausing beside Zephyrina to watch her conjure a human face out of graphite dust. When she finished the 321st portrait, a teenage girl with a defiant chin and frightened eyes, she signed the corner, scanned it, and uploaded the image to the Eidolon grid. The software pulsed gold, a match flagged in a missing person bulletin from Kansas City. A collective hush settled over the room, followed by an eruption of applause that startled even the sleep-deprived lawyers. That small victory, however, triggered a backlash upstairs. At noon, Delilah Arkwright strode in, heels clicking like a metronome, her expression tight. She beckoned Cashin to a glass-walled huddle room and closed the door, lowering blinds against curious stares. In low, urgent tones she explained that 3 remaining board members, spooked by market turbulence and angry investors, had filed a motion of no confidence. They blamed Cashin for mission drift, citing the sudden diversion of R&D resources to humanitarian forensics and the negative press likely to follow when Lacuna's victims testified. The vote was set for 6 o'clock. If Cashin lost, he would be removed as CEO before nightfall. Cashin listened without interrupting, the fatigue in his eyes hardening into resolve. When Delilah finished, he asked only one question: do they have the numbers? She hesitated, then admitted the tally stood at 3-3, with her own vote the tiebreaker. Cashin exhaled, not in relief but in calculation. Then give me until 5:30, he said. If I can show them that saving lives is accretive, not dilutive, they'll have no excuse. Delilah nodded, though doubt flickered across her features, and left to schedule the session. For the next 4 hours Cashin and Zephyrina orchestrated a demonstration equal parts hackathon and human drama. Data engineers fed Eidolon's API into Whitlock QS Visualization Suite, generating a real-time map of recoveries, potential leads, and financial impact models showing how each solved case translated into reduced liability, brand uplift, and, counterintuitively, new revenue streams from law enforcement analytics contracts. Meanwhile Zephyrina curated testimonials: a mother whose son had been located in a Houston shelter, a veteran reunited with his sister after 20 years, a bilingual schoolteacher willing to speak on camera about being trafficked across state lines. They recorded brief interviews in a corner studio, editing them into a 5-minute reel that began with raw fear and ended with cautious joy. When the final cut rendered, Cashin added a title slide: "Profit is when someone comes home." At 5:25 p.m. they walked into the executive boardroom together, Cashin in an open-neck shirt smudged with projector dust, Zephyrina still wearing her charcoal-stained blouse like a badge. The 6 board members sat at a polished mahogany table, legal counsel arrayed behind them. Holt's chair remained conspicuously empty, a silent reminder of the stakes. Cashin opened with the map, letting green dots flare across the screen as each portrait found a match. He layered on charts projecting that a single recovered victim saved insurers and municipalities an average of $2.3 million in lifetime costs. He spoke not of charity but of systemic efficiency, reputational capital, and the algorithmic edge Whitlock Q would gain by integrating real-world humanitarian data into risk models. When murmurs began to ripple along the table, he cued Zephyrina's film. The lights dimmed, faces on screen told their stories in hushed corridors, sunlit kitchens, sheltered common rooms. The final testimonial was the teenage girl from the morning's portrait, already rescued by a local task force that had pinged Eidolon's alert. She held a hand-lettered sign that read, "I'm not a data point. I'm proof." When the lights came back up, no one spoke for a full 10 seconds. Then Delilah cleared her throat, voice unsteady, and asked the board for an immediate vote. The resolution to remove Cashin failed, 4-2. Relief washed through the war room when the result reached them, but celebration was brief. At 7:03 p.m. an alarm klaxon echoed through Perdita Tower, unauthorized access to the primary data center. Security feeds flickered, revealing masked intruders disabling cameras with handheld EMP wands. Lacuna's retaliation had arrived. Cashin ordered a full lockdown. Zephyrina grabbed her messenger bag and sprinted for the stairwell, Cashin close behind. They descended 12 flights to the sub-basement, emerging into a corridor lined with humming server racks. 2 Whitlock Q guards lay unconscious but breathing, a third exchanged stun gun fire with an intruder in tactical gear. Cashin pulled the guard to safety while Zephyrina, unarmed, stepped into the open and shouted, "You're on a live feed to federal agents, drop the weapon." The intruder hesitated just long enough for the guard to fire a foam encapsulation round. Expanding polymer engulfed the attacker, hardening in seconds. Yet the breach had served its purpose. A black metal briefcase sat open on the floor, a portable drive array wired into the core switch. Red LEDs indicated data siphoning in progress. Cashin yanked the cable, but Zephyrina pointed to a blinking transmitter already broadcasting. Thinking fast, he flipped the array's power selector to input, converting it into a crude capacitor. Surging current backwashed through the transmitter, frying its circuits with a sizzle that smelled of burnt tin. Servers down the row went dark, but the outbound leak died with them. When the dust settled, Cashin slumped against a rack, adrenaline crashing. Zephyrina knelt beside him, wiping a smear of soot from his cheek. "You just sacrificed $1 million worth of hardware," she said. He managed a grim smile. "Cheaper than sacrificing 1 million lives." She laughed, hoarse, exhausted, but genuine, and helped him to his feet. Overhead, the lockdown siren ceased, replaced by the distant wail of approaching sirens. Local police and federal agents were already on their way. Later, back in the war room, Cashin signed the emergency requisition to replace the burned servers while Zephyrina updated Eidolon's status board. All Lacuna feeds terminated. System integrity, 97%. She added a footnote in smaller text, "Honesty clock now perpetual." Cashin saw it, chuckled softly, and wrote beneath, "Agreed." They stepped to the window, looking out over New Orleans where storm clouds gathered, violet against the sodium-lit streets. Zephyrina leaned her head on his shoulder, and he laced their fingers together, feeling the tremor finally leave his hands. "Tomorrow," he said, "we start on the clinics." She nodded, eyes tracking lightning flickers on the horizon. "And the day after that, the shelters. Then the warehouses. Until every blank face on the grid turns green." Neither spoke for a while. The city below pulsed with life, car horns, river barges, jazz leaking from open doorways, oblivious to the quiet vow forged 30 stories up. In that stillness Cashin realized the war room had become something else, a chapel of relentless hope, with monitors for stained glass and graphite saints guarding every wall. And beside him stood the woman who had drawn them into being, who had turned an accidental trespass into a crusade. He pressed a kiss to her lavender hair, tasted salt and charcoal, and knew Chapter 7 would demand even more of them both, but for the first time, he felt ready to pay the price. Dawn crept into Perdita Tower on the tail of a thunderstorm, rinsing the skyline until every pane of glass looked newly forged. Cashin and Zephyrina had slept little, an hour stolen on a sofa in the innovation lab, but the day refused to wait. By 8 a.m. a convoy of unmarked vans idled outside the loading dock, ready to carry Whitlock Q engineers and federal agents to the first of Lacuna's clandestine clinics. The war room thrummed with last-minute prep, drive imaging kits, chain of custody seals, thermal scanners to locate hidden rooms. Cashin moved through it like a field commander, checking that every team had the right credentials, the right passwords, the right emergency codes if things went sideways. Zephyrina, meanwhile, sat at a corner workstation converting the hand-drawn floor plans of each clinic into augmented reality overlays for the agents' tablets. Every so often she paused to rotate her stiff neck, and Cashin would appear with water or a protein bar as though summoned by radar. No one commented on the quiet orbit they kept around each other. After 48 hours of shared peril, their partnership felt as natural as a heartbeat. At 9:30, just as the teams filed out, an unexpected visitor slipped through the security cordon, Elroy Vance, vice president of Gulf Coast Mutual Bank. He was a compact man in a pinstriped suit 2 decades out of style, clutching a leather folio like a life vest. The receptionist tried to redirect him, but he insisted he had an appointment with Mr. Whitlock regarding a historical trust. Cashin, hearing the commotion, waved him in. Vance removed his hat with an air of solemn ceremony. "Mr. Whitlock, Miss Crane, I apologize for arriving unannounced. Our board received a notification trigger yesterday when someone accessed a dormant account established in 1925 by Miss Beatrice Havisham and Mr. Remy Duval. The trust stipulates that, upon verification of certain conditions, the balance, currently $10,842,000, transfers to the first pair who discover their sanctuary of secrecy and demonstrate love proven by selfless action." Zephyrina set her stylus down, eyes widening. "We found their letters in safe room 2 nights ago. But we never touched the account." Indeed, Vance said, the trigger was the hotel's hidden ledger. It contained an instruction: once the ledger is read aloud by qualifying parties, notify the bank. He opened the folio, revealing the original deed of trust, brittle but legible. "I'm here to verify your claim and, if satisfied, release the funds." Cashin's first instinct was to wave the offer aside. 10 million felt abstract next to human lives in transit vans, but Zephyrina's fingers tightened on his sleeve. "Wait," she said softly. "This money could end-run the board, the shareholders, everyone. We could scale Eidolon globally without begging a single investor." Cashin hesitated only a moment longer, then nodded to Vance. "What proof do you need?" "Nothing you haven't already provided," the banker replied. "The ledger page bears your thumbprints, and Hotel St. Germain's security logs show your keycards entering room 713 together. That suffices under the trust's archaic but legally binding terms." Zephyrina exhaled a shaky laugh. "A century-old scavenger hunt, solved by accident." "Or design," Cashin murmured. Beatrice and Remy wanted their fortune to seed the next great rescue. Paperwork took an hour, signatures flourishing across vellum and encrypted tablets alike. By 11, Gulf Coast Mutual had wired the entire balance into a freshly minted non-profit account titled Eidolon Foundation. The moment the confirmation pinged, Zephyrina spun in her chair and hooped, startling the nearest attorney into dropping a stack of affidavits. Cashin caught her hands, twirled her once, and kissed her forehead. "Operational freedom," he said. "No more begging for budgets." The celebration was short. Field reports began trickling in from the Shreveport clinic. Agents had breached 2 locked wards and found 12 patients sedated, their identities matching portraits on Eidolon. One, a middle-aged man with a phoenix tattoo on his neck, had murmured Zephyrina's name when the medics revived him. He'd seen her sketch circulated on underground forums, a signal that someone was looking for him. The news galvanized the room, yet it also cast a long shadow. If Lacuna had hidden 12 people in a single rural facility, how many more lay scattered across the country? Zephyrina traced her stylus along a map, highlighting every property Lacuna owned within 1,000 miles. "We need rapid response units in 4 states, she said. The Foundation can fund charter flights, mobile triage, witness relocation. But we still lack intel on their command hierarchy." Cashin rubbed his temples. Holt was middle management in their scheme. The top tier remains invisible. At that moment, a secure chat window bloomed on the main display, an incoming signal routed through 7 onion layers. The handle read Cygnus. A single line of text appeared, check the reverse side of letter 17. Coordinates. Go tonight. Bring the key. Zephyrina's pulse jumped. Cygnus is my anonymous source inside trafficking networks. I've never seen them initiate contact. She hurried to the evidence locker, retrieved the bundle of Havisham Duval letters, and flipped to number 17. The ink on the reverse was invisible until Cashin angled it under the overhead LED. Coordinates emerged, written in lemon juice, 29.9511 degrees north, 90.1139 degrees west, an abandoned river pier on the industrial edge of New Orleans. Cashin frowned. That pier's scheduled for demolition next week. And tonight it's deserted, Zephyrina said. Perfect for a handoff or an ambush. Delilah Arkwright, who had hovered at the edge of the room, interjected. You're not going alone. I'll have corporate security. No uniforms, Zephyrina cut in. Cygnus spooks easily. Cashin and I go, 2 unmarked cars at most. Delilah started to protest, then saw something in Zephyrina's expression, steel under lavender, and relented. Fine. But I'm sending a drone overhead, silent mode. Twilight found them in a nondescript sedan crawling along a service road parallel to the river. Freight cranes loomed like skeletal dinosaurs against a mauve sky. Cashin parked beneath a burned-out street lamp. Zephyrina pocketed the gold key from room 713 and slipped a compact flashlight into her boot. They walked the last 100 yards on foot, boots crunching over broken shells and glass until they reached the coordinates, a rotting warehouse door chained but not locked. Inside, the air smelled of river mud and rust. Moonlight seeped through a shattered skylight, pooling on a cargo elevator stuck halfway between floors. On the ground lay a violin case, new, polished, wildly incongruous. Zephyrina knelt, flicked the latches, and opened it. No violin. Instead, a stack of manila folders, a burner phone, and a small velvet pouch. Cashin lifted a folder. Inside were dossiers on Lacuna executives, photos, aliases, offshore accounts, even biometric scans. The second folder mapped every holding company, color-coded to shell boards, with a flowchart that terminated in a name they'd never seen, Sextant Holdings, Zurich. Zephyrina opened the velvet pouch and gasped. It contained a signet ring, a trumpet curling through an ornate R, the same emblem on Remy Duval's wax seal. Inside the band was engraved a single word, Encore. Footsteps echoed above. Cashin raised his flashlight, a figure stepped to the edge of the stuck elevator platform. The beam revealed a woman in her late 60s wearing a weathered bomber jacket, white hair tied back, a scar running from temple to jaw. She raised empty hands. I'm Cygnus, she said, voice gravelly. Remy was my grandfather. Zephyrina's mouth fell open. He and Beatrice survived. They fled to Paris, then Casablanca, smuggling musicians and Jews out of Vichy ports. After the war, they disappeared again, left clues for those who might need their bankroll one day. She nodded at the violin case. That day is now. Sextant is the present face of the same rot, bankers who trade in panic and people. Cashin swallowed. Why trust us? Cygnus shrugged. I watched your feeds. You broke Holt. You burned your own servers to stop a leak. That's love, son, love for strangers you'll never meet. My grandparents would approve. Outside, the distant whine of an approaching siren curled through the night. Cygnus glanced up. Your drone's tail was sloppy. Lacuna will be here in 5. Zephyrina snapped the case shut. Come with us. Cygnus shook her head. I'm a ghost. Better that way. But I'll call when Zurich is ripe. She pointed to the ring. Key to a lockbox at Banque du Liman, Geneva. Everything else you'll need is inside. Cashin heard gravel crunching, vehicles skidding to a halt outside. He grabbed Zephyrina's hand, pulling her toward a side door Cygnus indicated with 2 fingers. They slipped out as headlights swept the interior, ducked behind a stack of rusted barrels, and sprinted along a drainage ditch to the riverbank where Delilah's second car idled with doors open. The driver floored it before Cashin's door fully closed, fishtailing onto the service road. Through the rear window Zephyrina watched black SUVs swarm the warehouse like sharks circling a sinking ship. Back at Perdita Tower, midnight oil burned brighter than any desk lamp. The violin case's contents spread across the war room table like the hand of a royal flush. Cashin traced a line from Sextant Holdings to a familiar shell, Arcturus Analytics, a recent bidder for Whitlock US and used server farms. Zephyrina overlaid the dossier photo of Sextant's CEO, an urbane man with silver hair and hooded eyes, onto a still from the Hudson Building stakeout. Perfect match. So we have our maestro, she said, voice trembling with fatigue and triumph. Zurich is the next stage. Cashin leaned back, staring at the ring glinting under fluorescent lights. Encore, he whispered. The duet isn't finished. He looked at Zephyrina, her charcoal-streaked face radiant despite exhaustion. Geneva's a long flight, he said. Plenty of hours for you to sleep. And for you to dream without candlestick charts, she countered. He chuckled, then sobered. Whatever waits there, legal gauntlets, private security, Swiss banking secrecy, it'll be worse than Holt. Zephyrina slid her hand into his, squeezing once. Good. Then they won't expect us to waltz in with a trumpet. Around them the war room fell quiet, monitors idling on world maps, coffee cups abandoned in half-circles like sentinels. Outside, the Mississippi rolled on, indifferent to human conspiracies. Cashin rose, tugging Zephyrina gently toward the door. Let's go home, he said. Which one? She asked, teasing. The wrong hotel room, he answered, smiling. It's been hours since the first mistake. She laughed, a sound threaded with wonder, and together they left the glowing screens behind, stepping into a corridor where dawn's first blush was already seeping under the blinds, promising yet another day no algorithm could have predicted. They left New Orleans under a slate-gray dawn that turned the Mississippi into molten pewter, crossing the Atlantic in a chartered Gulfstream whose cabin lights were kept low so Zephyrina could sleep. Cashin dozed in fits beside her, the ring from Cygnus warm in his fist like a pocket-sized oath. Between catnaps he studied Sextant's org chart glowing on his tablet, dozens of subsidiaries braided through Swiss trusts, Liechtenstein foundations, and Panamanian holding companies. Every line converged on one man, Christian Volker, a financier who specialized in buying distressed assets during crises his own analysts quietly magnified. Geneva greeted them with high clouds snagged on the Alps and an air crisp enough to sting lungs tuned to Gulf humidity. A Whitlock Q expatriate team, 2 compliance lawyers and a server architect, met them at the tarmac with rental cars, encrypted phones, and an address for Banque du Liman's private client vault, a limestone fortress embedded in Quai de l'Isle. Inside the bank's atrium, sunlight poured through stained glass depicting ancient trade routes. The marble floor was polished to a mirror that doubled every passerby. A concierge guided them down 2 security levels, pausing at a steel door that required palm scan, retina scan, and the trumpet-crested signet. The lock accepted the ring with a clunk that sounded oddly ceremonial. The vault cell was smaller than Cashin expected, no larger than the hotel closet where he had first mistaken his life into hers. A single brass box occupied the center shelf, its lid engraved Encore. Zephyrina's breath caught, she lifted it carefully and set it on a velvet-lined counter. Inside lay 3 items. A leather notebook, edges flaking, stamped R&B Duval, 1946. A bearer share certificate, 1 million founding shares of Sextant Handel AG, issued 1947, and signed on the transfer line. A 78 RPM shellac record in a paper sleeve labeled, Duet for the Lost, Take 1. Cashin opened the notebook. Pages alternated between Beatrice's precise fountain pen script and Remy's looping pencil scrawl. They chronicled post-war months spent smuggling refugees, then a deliberate decision, to launder their fortune through a shell company, Sextant, so it could infiltrate any future cartel that preyed on the displaced. The final entry read, "One day our heirs will seize the helm, turn the Sextant from plunder to passage." Zephyrina traced the words, eyes shining. "They built Sextant as a Trojan horse. And we just inherited the horse." The share certificate named no heirs, only the bearers of the Havisham Duval ring. Swiss law meant possession was ownership. With a single signature on the reverse, Cashin or Zephyrina could claim controlling interest, 51%, of the very company masterminding Lacuna's pipelines. Cashin looked up. "We don't need to storm the gates. We are the gates." That afternoon they drove to Zurich, where Sextant's glass and copper headquarters rose over the Limmat like a dagger held hilt-up. Volcker was hosting a closed-door summit with hedge fund clients eager for early warnings on geopolitical shocks. Cashin donned a charcoal suit, Zephyrina a slate blue jacket that set off her lavender hair, and together they strode into the lobby, past guards who saw only two impeccably dressed executives. At the 25th floor reception, Cashin presented the bearer certificate. Swiss corporate law required immediate recognition. The receptionist's pupils dilated as she summoned legal counsel. Within minutes they were seated in a teak-paneled boardroom overlooking snow-rimmed peaks, facing Volcker and his stunned directors. Cashin slid the certificate across the table. "Article 7 of your charter transfers control to the first bearer who appears with original shares." "I appear. I bear." Volcker's voice was a hiss. "Those shares were lost in 1953. Zephyrina placed the notebook beside the certificate. "Not lost. Waiting." She tapped a page detailing Lacuna's founding capital, seeded by Sextant dividends. "Your board has laundered people like commodities. Effective now, Sextant will fund their liberation." Volcker rose, chair scraping. "Security will remove you." Cashin answered by opening a laptop and streaming a live video, U.S. Marshals escorting Holt in shackles, Swiss police raiding Lacuna's clinic in Basel, Eidolon's grid lighting up with green dots as more victims surfaced. "Your security is busy watching this feed," he said. "We geo-fenced every guard's phone an hour ago." Directors whispered, a compliance officer began paging through the notebook, face blanching. Swiss law prized legacy over ego, original intent trumped corporate custom. When the vote was called, only Volcker opposed. The motion passed, Cashin Whitlock and Zephyrina Crane, co-chairs. Volcker's exit was less dignified. He attempted to flee via rooftop helipad, but Zurich cantonal police intercepted the helicopter before rotors engaged. As officers cuffed him, Zephyrina watched through a window, emotions nodded, triumph, sorrow, resolve. Cashin's hand found hers. "We just changed the ending," he whispered. 2 days later, in a Zurich concert hall rented for a hastily organized press conference, Cashin addressed reporters beneath a banner reading Eidolon Foundation Europe. Behind him, a screen displayed the first 64 survivors flown from Lacuna sites, receiving medical care funded by Sextant's repurposed coffers. Zephyrina followed, unveiling the digitized Atlas of Lost Faces, now an open-source platform where anyone could upload sightings. A journalist asked if the new Sextant would still turn a profit. Zephyrina answered, "Profit is when someone comes home," and the room fell silent before erupting in applause that echoed off gilded balconies. That night they wandered the quiet banks of Lake Zurich. Street lamps painted ripples with gold brushstrokes, distant church bells tolled 10. Cashin, jacket slung over his shoulder, seemed lighter than she had ever seen him. "Haven't checked a market feed in 12 hours, he said, mock-amazed. "No tremors, no withdrawal symptoms." Zephyrina laughed. "That's because I confiscated your phone at dinner." She pulled it from her coat pocket, powered off. 7 hours honesty, remember? He stopped beneath a linden tree whose new leaves smelled faintly of honey. "Let's make it 7 years. Ambitious, she teased, stepping closer. Truth ages like wine, Whitlock. Handle with care. He reached into his coat, produced a small box. Inside lay the trumpet ring, resized to fit her finger, and beside it a slender band of white gold for him, etched with 5 tiny stars, her constellation tattoo. Partners, co-chairs, accidental co-conspirators, he said. Will you also be my wrong-room miracle, every day? Zephyrina's answer was a kiss that tasted of lake mist and promise. She slipped the trumpet ring onto her hand, he donned the starry band. Around them, the bells finished their peal, leaving the night strangely hushed, as though the city itself held its breath. Weeks later they returned to New Orleans for the anniversary of the night everything began. Room 616 had been permanently reserved under their names. The hotel manager greeted them with a grin and 2 keycards embossed in silver. Inside, the suite looked unchanged, sketches pinned to the mirror, jasmine oil on the console, but a new item rested on the bed, a vintage gramophone identical to the one in floor 7.5, its horn polished to a mirror shine. A note in Cygnus's scrawl read, "Play the record." Cashin set the 78 RPM disc on the turntable, wound the crank. Static crackled, then a lilting trumpet joined by a piano, Remy and Beatrice's lost duet. As the melody unfurled, Zephyrina closed her eyes, head on Cashin's shoulder. The music was scratchy, imperfect, alive, proof that love, archived carefully enough, can survive continents, conspiracies, and a century of silence to find the next 2 souls reckless enough to listen. Outside, the Mississippi rolled past, indifferent yet eternal, carrying steamboat whistles and distant laughter. Inside, the needle traced its spiral path, and Cashin realized his insomnia was gone. The only charts he saw now were the invisible staves of a song that had begun in 1925 and would, if they were careful, never truly end.